We will survive this. He stays with me.
He heard the cry before he saw her fall. Sharp and thin, like something tearing. The woman lurched forward, arms shaking, and shoved the bundle at him without asking. He caught it on instinct, hands rough and wrong, just before it slipped. Her knees hit the dirt. She didn't scream. She just breathed once, hard, like she'd been punched empty. The baby screamed louder. His chest locked. He had no idea where to put his hands. The head felt too loose. His heart thudded so hard he felt it in his throat. "Don't let him cry," she said. Her voice was low and cracked, rushed like she might lose it if she slowed down. "Please." "Ma'am," he said. The word came out stiff. "I don't. I ain't asking." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. There was dirt on her cheek. Blood too, maybe. He couldn't tell. "Just don't." The baby bucked and wailed. He shifted, panicked, then dropped to one knee because it felt safer closer to the ground. The child's face was red, scrunched tight. He pulled the edge of his coat around the small body without thinking. The crying broke, then slowed, then turned into small wet sounds. The quiet hit him hard. She watched him. Not the baby. Him. Her eyes were wide and dark, steady in a way that made his skin prickle. Like she was counting his breaths. Like she was weighing him. He swallowed. "You bleeding?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "You sure?" "I'm hungry," she said. "That's worse." He nodded, like that made sense. He stayed still. The baby's head rested against his chest. He could feel the heat through the flannel. The weight surprised him. Solid. Real. He held his breath, afraid of breaking something. She sank back against the woodpile behind her. Old split logs, stacked crooked. She slid down slow until she was sitting. Her hands shook as she pressed them flat on her thighs. "You alone?" he asked. She looked past him. "Right now." "You got family?" She laughed once, short and dry. "Not the kind that helps." He didn't ask again. He shifted his knee because it was starting to ache, then stopped when the baby twitched. He froze, every muscle tight, waiting for another cry. It didn't come. The baby settled deeper, cheek warm against his shirt. Her breathing hitched. She dragged in air like she'd been holding it too long. She closed her eyes. Opened them again. Closed them longer this time. "You okay?" he asked. "Don't move," she said. "Just stay." "I ain't going anywhere." She looked at him again, quick. "You promise?" He nodded. "Yeah." The baby made a small sound, softer now. He adjusted his grip, awkward, clumsy. He whispered without meaning to. "It's all right." The words felt strange in his mouth. He hadn't said them to anyone in years. He felt stupid for saying them now, but he didn't take them back. Her chin dropped to her chest. He thought she was thinking. Then her breathing changed. Long and slow. Too slow. His stomach tightened. "Ma'am," he said quietly. No answer. He leaned forward a little, careful not to jostle the child. "Hey." Nothing. The baby slept. The woman didn't move. Her head rested against the wood. Her mouth hung open just a little. He watched her chest. Counted. 1, 2, 3. It rose. Fell. Relief washed through him, sharp enough to sting. He glanced at the road again. No cars. No voices. Just wind in the trees. He told himself to stand, to hand the baby back, to walk away. His feet stayed planted. His arms tightened without asking him. He felt the woman's trust like a weight too. It pressed harder than the child. He swallowed and stayed, counting breaths, afraid that moving would end whatever fragile thing had begun here. He stared at the dirt, waiting for someone else to decide. He stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, holding what wasn't his. The road behind him was empty. The woods were quiet. His arms burned. He didn't shift. He didn't call out. He bent his head toward the baby and spoke so low it was almost nothing. "I got you," he said. Then he realized she was already asleep, and not waking. He stayed kneeling for a long moment, feeling the baby's chest rise and fall against his own. The flannel wrapped around the small body smelled faintly of sweat and old wood. He tugged his coat tighter, trying to shield the infant from the wind that crept through the stacked timber. He wanted to check on her, to shake her awake, but something in the quiet made him pause. She was still, pale against the woodpile, chest rising and falling in slow, ragged rhythm. He debated for a while, shifting the baby slightly, testing if moving would wake her. It didn't. The thought of leaving flickered across his mind, but the weight in his arms and the quiet trust in the woman's stillness held him in place. A snap of a branch in the distance made him stiffen. Footsteps approached, slow, cautious. He turned just enough to see a man from town moving through the trees, eyes narrowing at the figure of a woman slumped against logs and a stranger kneeling in the dirt. The stranger stopped a few feet away, sizing him up. "That yours?" the man asked. "No," the lumberjack said, voice low. He shifted the baby slightly, careful to keep its tiny head cradled against his chest. The stranger squinted. "Then why you holding it?" "Because it's breathing," he replied, blunt, steady. The words sounded strange even to him. The man's gaze flicked to the woman, noting her pallor, the way her shoulders slumped forward. He gave a half sigh. "Sheriff's been around," he said, voice lighter now, more a warning than a question. "Rules don't bend for nobody." The lumberjack didn't answer. Didn't move. Didn't look away. The woman stirred, small noises escaping her lips. She blinked, eyes snapping open. For a moment, she didn't speak, just measured the scene. Then she shifted slightly, reaching for the baby, but stopped when she saw him still holding it, steady, protective. Relief crossed her face, fleeting, fragile. He adjusted his coat again around the child, careful not to jostle it. The baby's breathing remained slow, even, and for the first time in a long while, the woman's eyes softened. She didn't ask him to move or to hand over her child. Instead, she watched him, curious, tentative, like someone testing the strength of a stranger. The stranger cleared his throat. "Ain't right," he muttered, half to himself, half to the lumberjack. "You can't just," the words faltered. The lumberjack didn't respond. The man shook his head and moved on, boots crunching against the dirt. The forest swallowed the sound again. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. The woman's gaze lingered, assessing him in ways he couldn't read. The baby twitched, tiny fingers curling, and he whispered without thinking, "It's okay." The words were soft, not commanding, just steady. She let out a small exhale, letting the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally. "You can sit there," she said finally, voice low, almost cautious. He stayed where he was, knees digging into dirt, arms unsteady but firm. She shifted on the woodpile, curling her knees to her chest. Her eyes didn't leave him. She wasn't demanding, wasn't pleading. She was waiting, seeing how long he'd hold, how long he'd stay. The wind picked up again, rustling leaves and loose bark. He kept still, felt the flannel against the baby's cheek, felt the warmth in his chest. It was a strange kind of truce, one that didn't need words. Minutes stretched, slow and heavy. He adjusted the coat one more time, covering the baby like a shield. The weight in his arms was grounding, solid, urgent. The woman's breathing shifted, slower now, more rhythmic, a quiet anchor beside him. He wanted to speak, to break the silence, but every word felt clumsy, intrusive. He stayed, steady, letting her watch, letting the baby rest against him. It was enough. It was fragile, but it was enough. The forest around them held its own hush. A crow cawed somewhere far off, then silence again. He shifted his weight slightly, mindful of the baby, careful not to jolt. The woman's gaze followed the movement, but she didn't flinch. She trusted him, tentatively, just enough to let him hold. The baby's chest rose and fell against him, tiny, perfect rhythm, and he whispered again, "I got you." The words felt more natural this time, the weight in them easing with repetition. She exhaled slowly, letting her eyes close briefly. He stayed kneeling, listening to the faint heartbeat of life in his arms, counting the breaths, matching the baby's slow inhale and exhale. His mind drifted briefly to the town, the stranger, the rules, the sheriff, but it couldn't leave the woman here, collapsed, fragile, trusting him in silence. He felt something settle in his chest, heavier than responsibility, deeper than instinct. The quiet between them became a small covenant, unspoken but binding. They didn't speak of tomorrow or danger or the eyes that might watch. They just existed in that moment, him steady, her resting, the baby calm. Time shifted, almost imperceptibly. The woman's head dipped against the logs again. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to disturb her, careful not to jostle the fragile piece. The baby moved, stretching a tiny arm against his chest, and he murmured softly, "It's okay, it's okay." She didn't wake, just exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the day leave her shoulders. The air around them felt dense, full of something unspoken. He stayed, arms locked around the small body, keeping watch, counting breaths, feeling the faint rise and fall against him like a fragile rhythm he was suddenly part of. Another branch snapped in the distance, a reminder that the world outside still existed, but he didn't flinch. His focus remained on the child, on the small life pressed to him, on the quiet form of the woman resting just behind. Minutes passed, then hours seemed to fold over themselves. The baby slept in his arms, untroubled, unaware of rules, strangers, or the weight of human decisions. He breathed with it, in time, a silent guardian, aware of the stillness, aware of the trust he hadn't earned but somehow carried anyway. The woman's chest rose and fell slow and steady, her eyes closed. He whispered again, almost a vow this time, "I got you. I won't let go." And he didn't. Her eyes opened, finally, just a flicker, seeing him, seeing the baby safe, and she nodded once, faint, fragile, like the truce had been sealed. He kept kneeling, not moving, not asking, holding them both through the wind, through the silence, through the slow, steady rhythm of trust that had formed between them. She jerked upright suddenly, hands reaching for the baby as if to check every breath and limb. He held back, letting her take him slowly, deliberately, transferring the small weight into her arms with care. Her fingers closed around the flannel, tensed, released, checked again. She scanned him quickly, like he was an inventory she didn't trust but had to accept. "You feed him?" she asked, eyes sharp. "No," he said. "Good," she replied immediately. He blinked. "Why good?" he asked. "Means you waited," she said, flat, almost proud. The words hit him harder than any accusation. Waiting. Patience. Trust earned slowly, in small increments, not demanded. She pulled the baby closer, rocking him slightly. Her hands were rough, but gentle, experienced. He studied her face, the lines, the dark circles, the exhaustion, and the faint traces of hunger that seemed permanent. She glanced at him again, then away, muttering, "They'll all tell you it's nothing. That it don't matter." He didn't reply. He wasn't sure what to say. Nothing he could say would make it right. She wasn't looking for his words anyway. "I've been begging," she admitted finally, low, rushed, defensive. "I've been at doors, at fields, at the store. Hands empty. Mouth empty. They don't care." She shook her head, exhaling sharply. "I don't ask for charity. I ask for food. He needs it. That's all." He nodded, silent, because that was the only thing he could do. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was stating a fact. Survival. Plain, brutal, simple. Her gaze flicked to the distance, past him. "Husband," she said, barely above a whisper. "Gone." She didn't say how, wouldn't say. She didn't want to. The word hung between them, weighty and unfinished. He respected it. Silence became their shared language, broken only by the soft sighs of the baby in her arms. She clutched him tighter, as if the child's life anchored her in ways nothing else could. "I ain't married no more," she added, almost to herself. Not that it matters. Her voice was quiet, but it carried an edge of stubbornness. She was tired, hungry, exposed, yet still sharp, still fierce. She didn't look like a woman who asked for help lightly. He stayed, knees bent, watching, listening, understanding that this wasn't a conversation. It was her declaration. He had no role but to hold, to be steady, to stay. The baby stirred, small sounds cutting through the silence. She shifted, rocking him slowly, softly humming a low, uneven tune. He recognized the rhythm. It wasn't melody, not really, just vibration, grounding, something passed down from someone who'd known fear and loss. She glanced at him briefly, almost smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was too much fatigue there. Still, the hint of expression was enough. Enough to tell him she was measuring him again, silently, carefully. His throat tightened, thinking how fragile she seemed and how strong. Hunger had hollowed her cheeks, exhaustion pulled her shoulders down, but her eyes held defiance. He had never met anyone like her. He felt inadequate, clumsy, useless in ways that mattered. Yet he stayed. That was all he could do. Hold still. Hold the baby. Keep the space between them safe. He learned fast that in this place, stillness sometimes carried more weight than action. Her stomach growled, sharp, a reminder that hunger was pressing in on them both. She winced slightly, shifting the baby on her hip, then laughed softly, bitter. "Damn it," she muttered. There it is again. The sound was human, ordinary, real, and it startled him. They were alone. Yet nothing about the day felt ordinary. The land around them seemed silent, listening. The wind moved through the timber stacks like it carried voices, old and accusing, judging the living. "Hungry?" he asked, almost absurd in its simplicity. She shrugged, one shoulder lifting, a gesture of defiance and resignation all at once. "Always," she said. "Doesn't mean I eat." The statement was heavy with meaning. Not pride, not stubbornness, just reality. Hunger was truth here. It wasn't about etiquette or laws or shame. It was about living another day. That was all she demanded. That was all she asked him to understand. He shifted on his knees, letting the baby settle deeper into his chest again. The child's breathing slowed, tiny fingers curling against his rough hands. He looked at her and tried to gauge whether she would ask for anything else. Nothing came. She watched, quiet, chest rising and falling with the weight of unspoken memories. He sensed there was more to her story, past pain, old grief, silence that had stretched generations. But she would tell it on her own terms, if ever. Time passed in fragments, measured in shallow breaths and the baby's small movements. He learned how to adjust, how to cradle, how to keep still. She observed him carefully, occasionally offering a soft correction. "Not like that," she said once. "Relax your arm. Don't squeeze." He complied. The baby shifted slightly, a small whimper escaping, then settled again. Her eyes softened just a fraction. Approval, subtle but there. It felt monumental. Then a louder rumble cut through the air. Her stomach growled again, harder this time, audible, unavoidable. She tensed, embarrassed, annoyed, human in a way that made him shift uncomfortably. She laughed dryly, shaking her head. "There it goes. Can't ignore it. Even now." He nodded, unsure what to do, feeling the absurdity of witnessing a raw, human moment in such a fragile, desperate time. Hunger and life, entwined in ways he didn't understand fully but respected. She shifted the baby in her arms, rocking him slightly, letting her own body take the brunt of discomfort. He watched silently, absorbing the scene. Every motion, every sigh, every quiet intake of breath was a lesson. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't ashamed. She was alive. And in that, he understood something he hadn't before. Strength didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered, steady, patient, enduring, like the slow rhythm of a child's breath against a stranger's chest. The sun dipped slightly behind the timber stacks, painting the dirt with long shadows. She leaned back, eyes narrowing, chin lifted. "You still here?" she asked softly, more observation than question. He nodded, keeping the baby safe. "I ain't leaving," he said. The words were simple, but full weight hung in them. She studied him, expression unreadable, then let the baby rest against her chest fully. Relief and wariness mingled in her gaze. The trust had shifted a small fraction, enough to be tangible. Enough to matter. Another rumble from her stomach reminded them both of the day's hardships. She didn't complain, didn't beg. She adjusted herself, rocking, humming faintly again, letting the moment stretch. Silence returned, but it was different now. There was a shared understanding, quiet and sharp. He would stay. She could rest. The baby could sleep. That was enough for now. The air around them felt heavier, full of small victories and fragile alliances. And the land, wide and unyielding, listened. He hoisted the baby onto his chest again, feeling the weight settle like a stone he had to carry carefully. She followed beside him, steps uneven, shuffling through the dirt road toward the small store at the edge of town. The baby stirred but didn't cry, tiny fists brushing against the flannel. Eyes followed them from cracked windows and porches. Whispers trailed behind them, sharp and low. He felt the tension like a pulse, counting each step with the baby's shallow breaths. He carried him halfway, then gently handed him back to her. She accepted him with a quiet nod, steadying him in her arms as though nothing else in the world could touch them. His boots crunched against gravel. He didn't look at the watchers. He just moved forward, slow, deliberate. At the door, the clerk looked up, tired and annoyed. She weighed them both with one glance, then spat, "We don't do credit." "I'll pay later," he said, voice firm but not loud. "Later ain't money," the clerk said, voice flat, unyielding. "He's hungry," he said, insisting on the simple fact, as if it could carry the weight of their need. "So am I," the clerk said, shrugging, as if empathy were a luxury she couldn't afford. The mother shifted the baby slightly, rocking him gently, and didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her gaze told him she had weathered worse. That she was used to the refusals and the shaking heads, to the low murmurs that accused her even when she begged for nothing more than food. The door creaked again, and the sheriff stepped in. Badge glinting, voice smooth, almost conversational. He didn't smile. "Afternoon," he said lightly, but his eyes scanned, calculating, resting on the woman and the child. "Everything all right here?" His question wasn't a question. It was authority pressed into the shape of civility. "Yes," the mother said quietly, her voice a thread, almost swallowed by the store's dusty air. He didn't ask further, just moved closer, shadow stretching, badge heavy against chest. His steps were deliberate, slow, the way someone measures a room before taking it. The lumberjack stayed beside her, a silent anchor, arms folded, fingers brushing against the rough flannel. He could feel the weight of unspoken rules pressing down. The clerk leaned back, brushing her hands on her apron, watching the exchange with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Coins clinked when he laid cash on the counter, far more than enough. He didn't ask for change. The mother's fingers grazed the baby's cheek, soothing, steady. "You ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, voice caught somewhere between exhaustion and relief. The sheriff's eyes lingered on them, sharp, and for a moment he stepped closer, as if testing whether the space between law and necessity could hold. The air felt taut, almost alive, humming with small, dangerous energy. Whispers from outside pressed against the thin walls. No one dared interfere. Not yet. He waited while she counted the coins quietly, carefully, eyes flicking up once to meet his. Not in trust, not fully, but acknowledgement. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling into the flannel again. The sound drew the sheriff's gaze. "You folks new around here?" he asked, tone deceptively casual. "No," the woman said. "Just passing." He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Well," he said, moving back toward the door. "Just remember, rules still apply. Always." There was no smile. No threat necessary. Authority was enough. Outside, the sun hit the gravel and scattered dust at their feet. They stepped out, the baby cradled again in the lumberjack's arms. Her eyes followed the movement, the way he held him, careful, steady. No words passed between them. It wasn't needed. The town watched from doorways and windows, whispers catching in the wind. He felt it pressing against him, the judgment, the curiosity, the low suspicion. He kept moving, deliberate, slow, letting the baby's steady breath guide his pace. Each step was careful. Each glance, measured. The world was a precarious place, but in this moment, they carved out a fragile pocket of safety. The mother's stomach growled softly, a sound that broke the tension just enough to remind them both of the day's realities. She didn't speak. She never did when it came to hunger, not fully. She adjusted the baby against her chest, letting him breathe easy, letting herself breathe. He walked beside her, silent sentinel. The flannel smelled faintly of the forest, of earth, of everything that mattered. He felt it pressing against his shirt, a soft warmth that anchored him, and he realized that for all the rules, the sheriff, the town, the danger, right now nothing could touch them here. He counted the baby's breaths, slow, even, steady. She shifted, rocking him gently. The sun dipped lower, long shadows stretching across the dirt and timber. He glanced back at the store once, noting the sheriff still watching from the doorway, badge glinting in the fading light, silent authority. Then he looked forward, chest tight, aware of the small life in his arms, the fragile woman beside him, and the space they held together in a world that often refused to yield. He whispered softly to the child, words he barely meant but felt necessary, "It's okay. It's all right." The baby twitched, small eyelids fluttering, then settled back into the warmth. The mother's hand brushed against the baby's cheek, slow, reassuring, her eyes meeting his briefly, fleeting acknowledgement, a small, silent bond forged through shared endurance and the quiet weight of survival. They settled on a flat stretch of dirt beside a collapsed fence, the baby finally feeding at her breast, tiny hands grasping blindly at her shirt. The woman leaned back against the rough timber, eyes half closed, breathing slowing as she adjusted to the rhythm of the child. He sat nearby, knees bent, hands resting on his thighs, watching silently. No one spoke at first. The wind carried faint whispers through the trees, rustling dry leaves and loose boards. It felt alive, almost aware, but neither of them reacted. He kept his attention on the baby's small chest rising and falling, tiny lips pressed to her, until she let out a soft sigh of relief. She relaxed, shoulders falling, just slightly, letting herself trust that he wouldn't leave. "You got a name?" he asked finally, voice low. The question sounded awkward in the air, intrusive, but necessary. She looked at him sharply, one dark eye visible over the child's head. "Yes," she said. "You gonna tell me?" he pressed. "No," she said, definitive, almost daring him to argue. He nodded, accepting the boundary. She wasn't hiding, she was guarding. He realized there was a difference. "Names mean power," she said quietly, rocking the baby gently. "They give people something to grab onto. Mine stays mine." He said nothing. He understood more in her silence than he could in words. She shifted, glancing around at the remnants of land that stretched toward the horizon, old fences, fallen logs, the worn edge of a well no one used anymore. "Old family," she murmured, voice low and tight. "Land taken. Father of the sheriff. You know the kind. They take, and they erase, and everyone else pretends it never happened." She let the baby move slightly in her arms, allowing the tiny fingers to curl around her own. "This place remembers," she said, eyes closing briefly. "Even the dead remember." The wind picked up, carrying a faint whistle through the old timbers. He shivered, thinking of the emptiness of the well she had mentioned, the silence that followed it. There was something haunted here, something that didn't die, that waited. The baby stirred, pulling at the edge of the flannel. She hummed low, soothing. The song was rough, fractured, but steady enough to anchor the child. He watched her, noticing the small ease that came over her in these tiny moments. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't posturing. This was real, the way she survived, steady hands, measured breaths, vigilance even in rest. He realized that the fragility he had assumed was a surface thing, masking a core he could barely touch. "Do you hear it?" she asked suddenly, voice low. He blinked. "Hear what?" She gestured vaguely toward the trees and the old fences. "At night. The wind, the dirt, the timbers.
They talk if you listen. This land remembers everything. Even those who are gone. He didn't know what to say.
He had heard winds in forests before, shadows shifting in corners, but this was different.
Her tone didn't invite disbelief.
It demanded acknowledgement. He nodded slightly, eyes on the baby, who now rested peacefully, small face relaxed.
Minutes passed. She leaned back, eyes softening, watching the child breathe.
The quiet was sharp.
No birds, no rustling, just the faint exhale of the earth around them.
He felt the weight of that quiet pressing in, heavy, demanding respect.
It was a lesson he hadn't anticipated. Power didn't always come from action.
Sometimes it came from endurance, from stillness, from witnessing without interference.
He could feel it settle in his chest, hard and unyielding.
The baby stirred again, then fell back into sleep, tiny limbs relaxing. She adjusted him slightly in her arms, careful, almost ritualistic.
He watched her face, noting the tension loosen, just enough. "You think this place is haunted?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. She glanced at him, a faint, ironic smile tugging at her lips. "It doesn't matter what I think. It remembers anyway." Her words hung in the air.
He could feel them pressing against him, heavy, almost tactile. The world around them seemed to lean in, listening.
He didn't move. Didn't speak further. Presence was enough.
The sky darkened slightly as the afternoon waned. Shadows stretched across the ground, long and thin, cutting across the dirt and broken fence posts. She adjusted the baby again, letting his small weight settle fully against her chest. He leaned slightly, watching, absorbing, learning from the quiet endurance, from the patience and subtle authority in her posture. She was not weak. She was not helpless. She was a quiet storm, unrelenting, anchored by the small life she carried. He could feel the baby's steady breathing against his chest, even though she held him now. Every rise and fall, tiny heartbeat, taught him something about fragility and strength entwined. He stayed close, silent, letting the wind carry the faint sounds of distant animals, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the land itself. He understood that in this moment, trust was being forged quietly, imperceptibly. Not in grand gestures, not in words, but in presence, in endurance, in respect for boundaries that weren't spoken aloud. She finally allowed herself to lean back fully, eyes half closed, the baby nestled against her chest. "Sleep now," she murmured, soft, more to herself than to the child. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, the subtle shift in her shoulders, the way she exhaled slowly, easing some of the tension he hadn't realized had filled the air around them. The baby shifted slightly, stretching tiny limbs, then settled. Peace descended unevenly but real. He felt a strange calm settle over himself, too. The landscape seemed to lean in with them, quiet and observant. No one came, no one interrupted, and for the first time that day, the world outside their fragile circle didn't matter. The weight in his chest, the flannel against skin, the steady breaths, became a rhythm he could follow. A rhythm that demanded stillness, demanded respect, demanded endurance. And so he stayed, watching, learning, keeping silent vigil as the day leaned into evening. The baby slept in her arms, peaceful, small, and alive. She watched, proud and wary, rooted, grounded. He knew that for now, that was enough. That was survival. That was trust. She shifted the baby against her chest again, adjusting his tiny body with deliberate care, and motioned for him to come closer. "Hold him like this," she said, voice low but firm, guiding his hands to cup the child properly. He followed, awkward at first, hands stiff, unsure. The baby squirmed slightly, small fists brushing his chest, and he froze. "Not like that," she corrected, her touch gentle but insistent. "Relax. He's alive. That's different." He nodded, swallowing, adjusting, trying again. Her fingers lingered over his hands for a moment, steadying, teaching, passing something heavier than instruction, trust. The child calmed under their combined attention, tiny eyes half closed, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. She finally sank back against the logs, exhaling sharply. "That's better," she said softly, letting herself rest fully for the first time in hours. Her shoulders sagged, tension leaving in quiet waves. The lumberjack stayed kneeling beside her, watching her carefully, aware that this was a rare surrender. Sleep was a weapon and a gamble for her, and he would not disturb it. He adjusted the flannel over the baby, keeping the weight balanced, arms steady. The warmth pressed into him, grounding and heavy, and he realized that holding the child was no longer awkward, it was necessary, a tether to the present, a shield against the day's relentless edges. The wind moved through the nearby timbers, carrying faint whispers that made him glance up, scanning the edges of the forest. He didn't see anyone, but the air felt alive, like it had memory. She shifted slightly, murmuring a few syllables under her breath, almost a song, almost a rhythm. The baby twitched, tiny fists curling against her chest. He leaned forward a fraction, adjusting the small body, careful not to jostle him. "It's okay," he murmured, voice low, unsure. She didn't respond, but her eyes flicked open briefly, registering the sound, soft acknowledgement, a subtle bond forming through unspoken words. Minutes passed in this rhythm. He held, she rested, the baby slept. The lumberjack felt the strange weight of responsibility pressing down, not like burden, but like inevitability. He had no choice but to stay, to hold, to witness. Every so often, she adjusted him, correcting his hands or posture, but gently, almost ritualistic, teaching him the rhythms of care he hadn't known existed. There was authority in her guidance, not domineering, not demanding, but anchored, real. It impressed him more than anything he'd ever seen. She closed her eyes again, letting the baby sink deeper into her arms. Her breathing slowed, chest rising and falling in careful cadence. He kept his own body rigid nearby, arms ready, eyes alert, scanning the road ahead without leaving her side. The flannel smelled faintly of the forest, sweat, and warmth, anchoring him to the moment. Every small sound, the baby's soft breaths, the rustle of leaves, the creak of timber, demanded attention. He gave it willingly, silently, learning how to inhabit the space she occupied without disturbing it. Time passed unevenly, heavy with quiet vigilance. He shifted slightly once, careful to keep the child balanced, and she murmured softly, guiding him again. "See? Just like that. He's small. Treat him small." He followed, adjusting, listening, absorbing. The simplicity of the lesson struck him, the patience, the stillness, the care required to sustain life, to offer trust without question. He had never thought much about holding a child, about responsibility that wasn't transactional, but he felt it now, raw, grounding, and he did not flinch. He stayed, steady, present. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the dirt and timber. The mother remained reclined, eyes closed, shoulders slack, a fragile peace settled around her. He held the baby closer for warmth, careful, alert, fully aware that their moment of quiet was temporary. Danger lingered beyond the trees, in town, in the distant roads, but for now, it was manageable, subdued by presence and stillness. Every heartbeat, every breath of the child and mother, became a rhythm he could follow, a measure of their fragile survival. He watched the road, feeling the tension in the air shift subtly. A vehicle approached, slow, deliberate. He tensed, hands gripping the baby slightly tighter. The engine idled faintly, low rumble carrying through the forest edge. He held, waiting, not moving, not speaking, as the shadow of authority, metal, glass, tires, touched the edge of their private world. The mother stirred slightly in her rest, sensing the approach without opening her eyes fully. Her hand brushed the baby's head, soothing, protective, quiet warning, as if telling him to stay alert without breaking the calm they had built. Minutes stretched as the truck idled, engine low, steady. He shifted again, feeling the flannel pressing against his chest, the warmth grounding him. She exhaled slowly, a subtle sigh that was relief, trust, and caution all at once. He stayed, kneeling, watching, guarding, prepared for whatever came next, fully aware that the world beyond the timber stacks could not intrude on the fragile pocket of safety they had created. The baby slept in their combined care, tiny limbs relaxed, chest rising and falling with rhythmic precision, untroubled by the shadows gathering at the edge of the forest. The sheriff stepped out of his truck, boots crunching against the gravel, badge catching the fading light. He moved toward them deliberately, slow, controlled, like a predator measuring his prey. The lumberjack rose, careful not to jostle the baby in his arms. The woman stirred, head lifting slightly, sensing the tension, chest tightening. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, voice smooth, measured.
You planning on keeping them? His question wasn't really a question. Authority pressed lightly into the shape of curiosity. The lumberjack's hands tightened around the child. No, he said. Simple. Honest. Truth enough, though he knew it wouldn't satisfy the law. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, resting on the woman, on the baby. Then why you acting like you are, he pressed. Because you're acting like you own them, the lumberjack replied, tone steady. The wind shifted, moving dry leaves across dirt. Silence pressed, tense, thick, waiting. The mother stirred fully now, slow, deliberate, rising despite weakness. Her hand brushed the baby's cheek. Thomas Whitaker, she said, voice clear, deliberate, using the sheriff's full name for the first time. The words struck. Authority paused. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He had underestimated her, assumed fragility meant submission. She straightened, small and frail but unyielding, eyes locking onto his. You don't get to talk to me like I'm nothing, she said. Not loud, but sharp, final. The lumberjack held the baby tighter, protective, immovable. The sheriff's jaw tightened, hesitation cutting the air between them. Power shifted, subtle, but undeniable. You got papers? The sheriff asked, tone lighter now, less weaponized. She shook her head. Not needed, she said. I am here. That's enough. The baby stirred, tiny whimpers escaping. She adjusted him against her chest. See, she said softly. He's alive. And he's mine to protect. The lumberjack remained still, knees bent, eyes alert. Every muscle coiled, ready, but unthreatening. They didn't need to fight. They only needed to stand. The sheriff weighed the silence, eyes darting between the child and the woman, then the lumberjack, realizing he hadn't accounted for this. Authority pressed, but it met resistance the moment it tried to assert itself. You're bending rules, the sheriff said, voice low, carefully controlled. I don't care, she replied, calm but firm. The air felt electric, taut, the forest and the dirt road holding its breath. The lumberjack's arms ached slightly, but he did not move. The baby's breaths were slow, steady, unaware of the power play surrounding him. She shifted slightly, rocking the child, asserting control with every gentle movement, every glance, every silent command. The sheriff's hand rested near his belt, but he didn't draw. He realized the woman's presence, the calm in the lumberjack's posture, the protective weight of their small circle made action unnecessary. Hesitation replaced certainty. You think I'm afraid of you, the sheriff finally said, tone clipped, trying to reclaim the moment. She tilted her head, eyes unwavering. I'm not afraid of what you can touch. I'm afraid of what you don't understand, she said, quiet, steady. Every word measured. Every pause a statement. The lumberjack's jaw clenched, arms still locked, aware of the subtle shifts in tension. The baby's tiny hands curled against her chest, unbothered, impervious, a silent anchor for all present. She straightened slightly, a ripple of power in her small form, commanding acknowledgement without raising her voice. The sheriff's eyes flickered, something unspoken passing between them, a calculation, a recognition of boundaries he could not cross without consequence. The wind picked up, carrying the faint whistle of trees through the timber stacks and dry leaves. He glanced at the lumberjack, assessing, then back at the woman. Authority was still present, but the balance had shifted. She was no longer fragile in perception, though her body was exhausted. She had claimed space, demanded respect with words and posture. The sheriff's hand moved slowly, deliberately, away from his belt. He took a half step back, conceding, not in defeat, but in careful acknowledgement. The crowd from the edges of town had begun to gather, curious, whispering. Eyes followed every motion, breath held. The sheriff's pause was amplified by the weight of witnesses. The woman adjusted the baby once more, voice low, almost to herself, almost a lullaby. Stay still, she murmured. The lumberjack mirrored her stillness, unwavering, locked in position, arms steady, eyes sharp. The sheriff lingered, calculating, measuring the fragility and strength intertwined here. Finally, he straightened, stepped back, letting the moment breathe. Not gone, not forgotten, but delayed. Authority retracted slightly, power balanced delicately on unseen lines.
The mother leaned back against the timber, chest rising and falling slowly, small sigh of relief escaping her lips. The baby stirred but remained calm, breathing easy against her chest. The lumberjack exhaled, tense, slowly letting his arms relax marginally while still maintaining protection. She glanced at him briefly, faint acknowledgement passing between them, small smile, almost imperceptible. The crowd murmured, curiosity and awe mixing.
The sheriff's truck idled in the distance, engine low, waiting, observing. The power in the moment was settled, fragile, balanced on quiet understanding rather than confrontation. She had claimed authority not through aggression, but through endurance, presence, and unwavering claim to what was hers. The lumberjack remained kneeling, vigilant, silent guardian of their small, unbroken circle. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sharp whistle through the timber stacks. She shifted the baby against her chest and motioned for him to sit closer. "The well," she began, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. He leaned in, aware that whatever she was about to say would be heavy. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, dark and distant. "They said it was an accident," she said, tone tight, bitter. "My husband," he tried to speak. They silenced him. Covered it all up. Bodies, names, whispers no one dared repeat. The sheriff's father had a hand, everyone did.
Her hands trembled slightly, fingers tightening around the baby.
"They said it was nothing. That the land forgets. It doesn't. It never forgets."
He stayed silent, listening, the weight of her words pressing like a stone in his chest.
The baby stirred, tiny noises escaping, but she held him close, gentle, protective. "Was it an accident?" he asked finally.
The wind carried the sound away, but it was enough to draw her gaze. "No," she said, voice soft but firm, eyes narrowing. "No, it was deliberate.
And the well, it still breathes. You can hear it if you listen."
She gestured vaguely to the crumbling structure at the edge of the property, overgrown with weeds and shadow.
"Bodies at the bottom. Silence above. Everyone pretends, but the land knows. And so do I." The forest held its own hush, listening, waiting.
Dry leaves rustled, wind shifting, the faint whistle threading through the broken timber. He leaned forward, instinctively cradling the baby closer, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life pressed against him.
He hadn't anticipated this.
The rawness of memory, grief, and exposure hung thick in the air. He realized she carried not just the child, but the weight of the past, ancestral wounds folded into her small, trembling frame. The land itself seemed to lean in, listening, aware.
"Why show me?" he asked, voice low. "Why tell me this?" She didn't answer immediately. She shifted slightly, rocking the baby. "Because someone has to remember. Someone has to stand here and not look away. Not for the sheriff, not for the town, but for him. And for him."
Her hands shook as she adjusted the child, holding him closer, face brushing the flannel.
"The land listens. The well listens. You can hear it if you care. You can feel it."
The wind picked up, sounding almost like low voices in the distance, whispers threading through the trees, weaving through timber and earth.
He stiffened, feeling the odd, pressing presence in the air, subtle and haunting.
It was more than memory, it was living, breathing, unbroken. The baby shifted, letting out a soft whimper.
She cooed, rocking gently, murmuring words he couldn't catch, lullaby-like.
He held his breath, sensing the fragile balance, aware that any sound might fracture it. She exhaled, head tilted back against the timber, eyes closed briefly.
"They told me to forget. That it was better if I didn't speak."
"I can't," she said. The words were simple, taught with determination.
"I won't. And now. I need you to understand. That this land, these wounds, they don't go quiet just because people pretend."
He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. Every fiber of him was tense, vigilant. He had expected hunger, cold, maybe exhaustion. Not the raw pulse of accusation, grief, and memory that seemed to press in through the trees, through the well, through her small body. The baby stirred again, and she pressed him closer.
He's alive, she said, voice low, deliberate. And you're alive. That's enough for now. She exhaled, letting herself rest, though eyes remained sharp, aware of shadows and whispers, presence and absence. The weight of her story lingered, pressing, insistent. The air felt thick, listening. Walk me back, she said finally, voice low but commanding. He looked at her, hesitant. To the well? He nodded. She adjusted the baby, checking the flannel, hands gentle but steady. Yes. It's time someone saw what they tried to bury. Time someone stood there awake. He rose, lifting the baby carefully in his arms, steady, protective, aware of the significance of every step. They moved slowly toward the shadowed edge of the property, toward the crumbling well, the silence above, the land that remembered everything. The wind carried faint voices, real or imagined, shifting through the trees, threading around the broken fence and timber stacks. She walked beside him, small, determined, the baby secure against her chest. Each step pressed into the earth, into memory, into a truth most refused to face. He felt the tension pressing, a quiet awareness that the past and present coexisted here, and he was being drawn into both. Every leaf, every shadow, every creak of the timber seemed alive, listening, waiting. And for the first time, he understood that this well, this land, and this woman demanded acknowledgement, not just of what had happened, but of what could not be ignored. They stood at the edge of the well, the baby cradled tightly against the lumberjack's chest, tiny fists pressing against the flannel. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and old wood, the remnants of forgotten graves just beneath the surface. She shifted slightly, eyes scanning the shadow tree-line, every muscle taut, every breath measured. The sheriff appeared again, truck idling behind him, boots crunching on gravel, men following silently. Authority had returned, heavier, more insistent this time. Put the baby down, the sheriff commanded, voice carrying across the dirt. The lumberjack's hands tightened instinctively, but he didn't move. No, he said simply, tone firm, eyes locked on the approaching men. You don't know what you're doing, the sheriff pressed, stepping closer, the men flanking him like walls of pressure. I do, the lumberjack said. Voice low, unwavering. His eyes flicked to her, small nod exchanged. She stepped forward despite weakness, frail but unyielding, chest lifted, standing taller than her frame should allow. Stop calling me scared, she said, voice steady, cutting through the tension. She adjusted the baby slightly, letting the child's head rest on her shoulder. Names matter, she said, voice quiet but sharp. This one's mine. I decide. You decide nothing. The sheriff hesitated, jaw tight, trying to assert control through presence alone. You think you can stand here, defy me? He asked, tone carefully measured, testing the boundary. She didn't flinch. She exhaled slowly, chest rising deliberately, small but unbroken. I'm standing. You're seeing me. That's enough, she said. Her voice carried across the clearing, a quiet insistence that commanded recognition. He looked to the lumberjack, assessing, then back to her, realizing that any move would risk escalation he couldn't manage. The baby stirred, small noises escaping, but she held him closer, rocking gently, protective, unbothered by the power struggle surrounding them. You've got no right, the sheriff said finally, voice sharper, almost clipped. This child, my child, she interrupted. Mine. Do you understand? Her words were measured, deliberate, a line drawn in the dirt. Authority faltered under her small but relentless presence. The lumberjack stayed still, hands locked around the baby, eyes scanning the surrounding forest, alert but not threatening. He felt the tension like a living thing pressing from every angle. The men flanking the sheriff shifted slightly, unsure, witnessing authority checked by will alone. The land seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes narrowed, voice steady, unwavering. You're not touching him. Not today. Not while I stand. Every syllable carried a quiet, immense weight. Names were spoken aloud for the first time, declarations cutting through the oppressive authority like a knife. The sheriff's jaw clenched, posture tightening, but he held his position. He could not move forward without risk, without challenging more than his badge could enforce. The lumberjack felt the fragile balance of power tilt subtly, the line drawn by small, determined hands and steady eyes.
The wind shifted, whistling faintly through trees and broken timber stacks, carrying whispers of old memory. She adjusted the baby again, rocking him gently, softly murmuring words he could barely hear. The sheriff stepped back a fraction, glancing at his men, who hesitated, uncertain now of the morality and risk of intervention. The child's chest rose and fell against the lumberjack's hands, small breaths marking time, a fragile heartbeat against the tension that pressed like a second skin. Presence, trust, and insistence had stilled the law's edge without a shot fired, without a single hand laid. It was defiance by endurance, quiet and resolute. "Do you understand?" she asked the sheriff finally, voice low, deliberate, unbroken. He swallowed, chest tightening, aware of the witnesses, aware of the woman's determination, aware of the child in their midst. The men shifted uneasily behind him. The sheriff exhaled sharply, finally stepping back fully, conceding the moment, not defeated but delayed, aware that immediate action would provoke scrutiny he did not control. The baby stirred, tiny whimpers barely audible. She pressed him closer, gentle, protective, a living shield, steady and unyielding. The lumberjack's arms ached slightly, but he stayed firm, vigilant, locked into the rhythm of breathing, heartbeats, and subtle movement. The sheriff's men lingered, hesitant, questioning, powerless to act without order that had already been subverted by the quiet insistence of will and presence. She let herself shift slightly, standing small but monumental, rocking the baby gently, eyes scanning each face, measuring the balance of power. Silence pressed thick around them, the land itself seeming to lean in, listening, waiting, acknowledging. The well behind them seemed to breathe in tandem with her words, the shadows and memory of the place lending weight to every syllable spoken, every breath drawn. Finally, the sheriff and his men began to withdraw slowly, stepping back, giving ground, authority delayed but not vanquished. She remained, chest heaving slightly from exertion, baby safe in arms, standing small yet unbroken, eyes scanning the clearing, acknowledging the quiet victory they had carved. The lumberjack remained beside her, vigilant, protective, arms still locked around life's fragile weight, understanding the significance of the moment. The land around them held its breath, shadows lingering long and silent. Presence had won. Defiance held. And the child remained untouched, cradled between two quiet guardians, a living testament to endurance, courage, and small but unyielding power. The authorities withdrew slowly, dust rising from the tires of the sheriff's truck and the footsteps of men retreating, leaving the clearing silent except for the wind threading through timber and broken fence posts. She sank onto the edge of the well, shoulders slumped, exhaustion visible in every line of her body. The baby rested peacefully in the lumberjack's arms, tiny limbs curled against his chest rising and falling evenly. He sat beside her, knees bent, back straight, alert, watching the forest edge, the fading shadows, the quiet land around them. The day's tension lingered like a second skin, but the immediate threat had passed, leaving a fragile space of stillness and cautious relief. "You saved us," she said quietly, voice low, worn, but firm. She didn't look at him directly, eyes focused on the small circle of dirt and shadows before them. He shook his head, careful with the baby, voice even, restrained. "No," he said. "Then what?" she pressed softly. "I stood still," he replied. The words were simple, but full weight hung in them. The act of stillness, of enduring, had protected them more than any confrontation, any argument, any gesture of law. She exhaled, a low sound of acknowledgement, letting her body relax slightly, shoulders loosening against the weight of constant vigilance. The baby stirred, small whimpers escaping, and she adjusted him gently in his arms. He rocked him carefully, a soft murmur passing between them, words unneeded, rhythm sufficient. She watched, eyes softened, chest rising and falling with each movement of the child. The wind carried faint whispers, threading through broken timber and rusted fences, faint but insistent, like a memory speaking in soft pulses. She shifted closer to the lumberjack, leaning slightly against him for balance, eyes scanning the land beyond the clearing, wary but unafraid. The baby yawned, curling tighter against her chest. "Sleep again," she murmured, low, almost a command. The lumberjack adjusted the baby, ensuring warmth and comfort, gentle pressure, steady hands. He whispered softly to the child, voice calm, measured, soothing. Tiny eyelids fluttered, then closed, chest rising and falling in even rhythm. The mother exhaled sharply, a sound that carried exhaustion, relief, and quiet triumph all at once. She sank further against the timber, letting her body relax, surrendering fully for the first time since the day began. The lumberjack remained still, vigilant, arms steady, presence constant, a living wall around their fragile circle of safety. The sun dipped lower behind distant ridges, long shadows stretching across dirt and broken fence posts, painting the clearing in muted golden gray. She shifted slightly, adjusting the baby, murmuring soft sounds, barely audible. The lumberjack watched, silent, alert, knowing that vigilance was not yet over, that the world beyond this small space was still alive and unpredictable, but for now, the circle they had carved remained intact. No words passed between them. They did not need them. Presence, action, endurance, these had become the language they shared. Time moved slowly, measured in shallow breaths, in the soft hum of the wind, in the gentle rise and fall of a tiny chest against a larger one. She finally leaned back fully, eyes closing, shoulders slack, breathing even. The baby rested, secure, warmth pressing against him. The lumberjack remained seated, steady, alert, observing the line between light and shadow, between safety and threat, fully aware of his role, his responsibility. No one could reach them here, not while he remained still, vigilant, present. The land seemed to settle around them, listening, holding its breath alongside them, shadows folding in, accepting the quiet resolution. She shifted her head slightly, whispering faintly to the child, murmuring lullaby-like sounds. He adjusted his hold gently, careful, protective, maintaining warmth and rhythm. Every movement precise, controlled, deliberate. The air was thick with memory, witness, and unspoken acknowledgement. The small circle of life, mother, child, protector, stood firm against the weight of the day, against authority, against the shadows of the past. Silence became a shield, stillness a safeguard. He felt the gravity of the moment, of his presence here, of the fragile trust that had formed and endured. Night crept in slowly, soft, unyielding, the horizon darkening, the clearing settling into stillness. She slept, deep and unbroken, finally at peace. The baby slept, small chest rising and falling, untroubled, warm, safe. He remained seated by the well, arms steady, eyes alert, absorbing the quiet, the rhythm of life protected in his hands. Presence became closure, vigilance became release, endurance became triumph without words. The land itself seemed to exhale, shadows settling around them like a protective cloak. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply existed, sentinel, guardian, witness. The wind whispered through timber and over dirt, faint, almost inaudible, carrying traces of the day's events, of memory, of persistence. She shifted slightly in sleep, murmuring softly, comforted. The baby nestled closer, breaths even, secure. He adjusted slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. Night deepened. Stars began to prick the darkening sky, distant and cold, but their light touched nothing here. The clearing was silent, held in suspension, preserved in the quiet endurance of those who remained. Life persisted in stillness, safety carved by presence alone. He exhaled softly, chest tight with relief and awareness. They had survived, not through force, not through confrontation, not through words, but through steadfastness, observation, and presence. The mother rested unbroken. The child slept peacefully. The land listened, silent but witness to the fragile triumph. And he remained, seated, arms steady, eyes scanning, fully present, the final guardian of the small circle carved in a harsh, unforgiving world. The story did not end with victory, but with presence. Not with promise, but with unyielding reality. Silence, life, and trust became their shared conclusion.